The Hunter in Golden Gate Park. Golden Gate Park has always held a strange allure, its sprawling green fields and shadowy groves seeming both welcoming and ominous. By day, joggers and tourists filled its trails, but by night it became a haven for the forgotten. Among them was Carl, a homeless man who had made the park his refuge for the past 3 years. Carl knew the park better than anyone. He had a favorite bench near the Japanese tea garden and a secluded grove where he'd sleep, hidden from prying eyes. But lately, something about the park felt wrong. There were whispers among the homeless community, stories of strange sightings and people disappearing without a trace. One night, Carl was sitting by a dying fire in the dense eucalyptus grove, clutching his tattered blanket against the chill. The park was unusually quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. He thought he heard footsteps, light and deliberate, too soft for a jogger or late-night walker. He glanced over his shoulder, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched crept up his spine. Carl stood, grabbing his makeshift walking stick. "Who's there?" he called into the darkness, his voice echoing eerily. No answer. He cursed under his breath and began walking toward the nearby meadow, hoping the open space would ease his nerves. The moment he stepped into the moonlit field, he froze. At the far end of the meadow stood a figure, tall and unnaturally still. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its arms hung too long at its sides, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Carl squinted, trying to make out details, but the figure stepped back into the shadows before he could see more. "Hey!" Carl shouted, his voice cracking. "What do you want?" Silence. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. It wasn't like any animal Carl had ever heard. It was too deep, too menacing. He turned and began to walk faster, his heart hammering in his chest. As he reached the edge of the grove, he heard it again, this time closer. A voice called out behind him, soft and pleading. "Help me, please." Carl stopped in his tracks. It sounded like a woman, her voice weak and trembling, but something about it felt off. The cadence was wrong, almost like it had been rehearsed. Slowly, Carl turned around. The figure was closer now, stepping into the moonlight. But it wasn't a woman. It wasn't even human. The creature's face was a grotesque mimicry of humanity, its eyes too wide, its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. Its skin was pale and leathery, pulled tight over its frame. And those arms, long, clawed, and reaching toward him. Carl ran. He sprinted through the park, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature followed, its movements eerily fluid, almost playful. It didn't seem to tire, its footsteps growing louder and louder behind him. Carl dove into a thicket, hoping to lose it in the dense underbrush. He held his breath, clutching his stick tightly as he listened. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from just outside the thicket, he heard it again. "Help me, please." But this time, it was his own voice. Carl's blood ran cold. He bolted from the thicket, running blindly through the park. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to get away. But no matter how far he ran, the creature was always there, just at the edge of his vision, watching, waiting. The next morning, the park was as peaceful as ever. Tourists strolled along the trails, and joggers passed through the meadows. But Carl was nowhere to be found. His few belongings were discovered near the eucalyptus grove, abandoned and covered in dirt. The whispers continued among the homeless community, stories of the skinwalker that hunted in the shadows of Golden Gate Park. Some claimed they'd seen it, while others swore they'd heard Carl's voice late at night, calling for help. But no one ever saw him again.